It's cheaper to do it. Not destroying the driveway and landscaping and everything.
Okay. So I'm going to start. So if I want you to flip this, I'll do the flipping. Okay, cool. All right, I think we're going to get this kicked off. So first, just by way of introduction, my name is Eric Rosenblum. I was one of the founders of Palo Alto Forward. I drew the short straw this year in acting as president this year, but hopefully next year maybe Amy. I'm so excited everyone's here. This is one of my favorite topics. I was on the Planning and Transportation Commission for Palo Alto for 4 years, and this was one of also my favorite topics while I was there. I think this is one of the best ways to add housing to Palo Alto. I think it benefits our community. I think it benefits everyone here. I just want to call out a couple people just behind the scenes, and you'll be seeing them later. But in particular, first, I want to call out Courtney. Put your hand up, Courtney. So Courtney just graduated from Stanford. She's been a rock star in helping us organize this event. She's pulled together a lot of research about ADUs. If anyone out there is building an ADU, I'm sure she'd love to hear from you. She's collecting stories, collecting data. So she's going to help build the knowledge base for people that are working on this around Palo Alto. And Amy Song is my partner in crime with Palo Alto Forward, is the head person for this event. We'll introduce Russ in just a moment, but I want to just take 2 minutes and talk to you about what Palo Alto Forward is, and then get on to the main event. So first, the tagline kind of says it all: better options for housing and transportation. We care deeply that people can afford to live in Palo Alto. And we think that means having a variety of different kinds of housing, more housing, and some protections for people who are here. So a variety of things that make Palo Alto a more diverse and livable place. If you have those people and you have more housing, you need transportation. You need some way for people to get by without having multiple cars maybe, or use a car a little less, or maybe have other options. So these are the things we care about. These are the things that we do. So next. So this is what we're going to talk about. Actually, let's go forward beyond this. So I just want to walk you through who we are. So it's just a group of people from Palo Alto. So we're optimists. We think that we can meet the future population needs with good planning. And so again, anyone here that wants to get involved, is interested in an ADU, but also interested maybe in the broader environment, we are just a group of citizens that work on these things, and we think that there are solutions. Go 2 more slides. 1 more. It's all right. So we host a lot of educational events. We host various forums, and we talk about policy. And finally, we're everyone. So if you think about who's on our board, and I encourage you to go to our website and look, there's people that are retired, there's people that are just starting out, there are people who are really trying to figure out how to get their kids to stay in town, there are people that are thinking about how to start their own families and what kind of community they want to be part of. So the final thing that I'll say before kicking it off to the meat of this presentation is, when I was on the Planning Commission, this was an important topic. And people that come to speak represent a lot of different views. Some of them are worried that the quality of their neighborhood will be decreased by having ADUs, so there'll be more people. Some of them are excited because it might mean that they can stay in place, or that their kids can stay in place, or there's more variety. But it all happens because people show up and talk at council and talk to the PTC. And so my final plug is, council was supposed to have brought this to their chambers this week. It didn't happen. There was too much stuff on the agenda, but it'll happen soon. And so for those of you who are here that are interested in ADUs, everything from parking requirements to the impact fees to tax assessments, all of this will impact the ability for people to actually get this done. And so to the extent that you have opinions about this, you should make your voices heard. That's how things get done here. So I just encourage you to be part of this process. So if you signed in, we'll keep you informed as these things go to council or other commissions and where they're going. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Amy, who's going to kick off our festivities. Thank you. Oh, yeah, we'll the main two parties.
So, Welcome and good evening. I don't have the big voice as Eric, so I'm using this microphone, and I hope that everybody can hear me. Can you hear me okay in the back? Like Eric said, we are just a group of people that live here in Palo Alto, and we are very interested in our local issues. And something that really is dear and near to our hearts is housing and transportation. And we have had a lot of people talking about ADUs. We hosted an event last year. That was really an enthusiastic response to our event. And today we have some examples and people who have gone through these ADU processes. But before we share that experiences from those who have done their ADUs, we have, backed by our popular demand is our Ross from Planning Department. He is here to tell us what has changed, in the gist, what is ADU and what kind of the rules and procedures has been clarified. So, Russ, thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Good evening, everyone. Happy to be here tonight to speak to you, give you some information. So, I don't know if you have my slide. We can start on the presentation overview. There we go. So the next slide. Basically, I'm going to cover for you, review some of the changes that happened since the city adopted its new code on ADU back in May of last year and was implemented in June. I'll also cover some current ADU numbers, what's transpired since that time, and then provide a summary of changes that was supposed to be heard. Eric mentioned this by council on Monday night, but they weren't able to get to it on their agenda. There's a lot of clarification items on there, and those will be heard at hopefully a near future date. And then look at some key items to be aware of when you're building an ADU. So kind of launching into some of the big changes that took place last year. They reduced the minimum lot size from over 8,000 square feet down to 5,000 square feet. So this really opened the door for people that don't have very large lots to be able to build an ADU. They allowed for the conversion of existing legally constructed accessory structures to be converted to ADU. They allowed for the conversion of existing covered parking to be converted to ADU without the need to replace the covered parking. This is huge. Your parking counts as required floor area. So each parking space is about 200 square feet of floor area. And so if you don't have to replace that, that's extra square footage either for your home or for your new ADU. So this was a big barrier that was removed. Another change, when covered parking spaces are replaced with new uncovered parking spaces, they're now permitted most anywhere on the site, even within your front yard setback. So that gave you options. Currently, under the code, you can't park in your required parking spaces can't be in the front yard setback, but when you're building an ADU and you remove the garage to do that, you can put your parking spaces there. Eliminated the parking requirement for new ADUs. It used to be that when you built a new ADU, you had to provide at least one new covered parking space for that ADU, and now that's been removed altogether. No new parking spaces have to be provided. They reduced the required rear yard setback for ADUs from 20 feet down to 6. So it made it much more flexible. You have the option to use a majority of your rear yard for the location of the new ADU. Bonus square footage of 175 square feet was added. So again, if you're close to your floor area limit, this gives people a little bit more flexibility to be able to build an ADU if they didn't have enough square footage to do so. A few more changes here. Significant increase in ADU, these are the trends that we've seen since all of those changes were made. Since those changes were made about 15 months ago, we've seen 62 permits for new ADUs. Prior to that code change, we only saw about 4 new ADUs per year, and now we're seeing about 4 per month. That's about 48 new ADUs per year. So the increase has been pretty dramatic. We don't know if this is going to continue at this rate. It might just be people that wanted to do it couldn't do it before, now the code changed, so they're jumping in on it. But hopefully this is a trend that continues. So there were a number of clarifications that staff was looking for council to make as a result of all those code changes that took place last year. Those changes were supposed to go last Monday night, but unfortunately they didn't have a chance to get to it. But I'm going to cover for you what those changes are. There's a very detailed staff report that's available online that was on the agenda for last Monday night, and you can look at that, but I'll cover the highlights here. So one of them was to clarify that ADUs may be established in all zone districts that permit single-family use.
Russ, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. How about this? Better? Fantastic. All right. Better? Second item was to clarify that basements are not permitted in the 20-foot rear yard setbacks for detached ADUs. Currently, the house has a required rear yard setback of 20 feet, the main residence. But your ADU is allowed to be built in there. The current thinking is that, at least from the Planning Commission, their recommendation is to not allow the basement of an ADU to be in that 20-foot rear yard setback. So if you want to have an ADU that has a basement, it's got to be out of the 20-foot rear yard setback. There is a state bill that it's Assembly Bill 2890 that would establish a 4-foot side and rear yard setback for ADUs. So even though we currently have a 6-foot setback, if that goes through, then the setbacks will be reduced down to 4. We wanted to clarify the allowable setback and daylight plane encroachments for detached ADUs. So this is specific to eaves. When we measure setbacks, they're measured to the building wall, from the property line to the building wall. So currently we have a 6-foot setbacks for ADUs. But what about the eave? If you've got an eave, which most structures do, what is the allowance for that? Well, the code that was written last year was silent to that, so we wanted to get clarity. Typically, eaves are allowed to go 1 to 2 feet into that setback, so we just wanted to get council to weigh in and get that in the code so it's clear what people can do. Item number 4. So clarify the bonus lot coverage and floor area to apply to existing or proposed homes that were built as of January 1st, 2017. So currently the code states that you get this bonus floor area for new ADUs when you have an existing home on the lot. So what some people are asking is, well, if I build an existing home today and then come back later and propose an ADU, do I then get that 175-foot bonus square footage? We wanted to understand what council's intent was, so we're asking to get clarity on that. We're assuming that when they talk about existing homes, they're talking about homes that existed when the new code changes happened, which was January of 2017. So item number 5, adjust the bonus floor area amount to match the minimum unit size requirement, which is 220 square feet per the building code. So currently the bonus in the code is 175 square feet, and the thinking is that if we're trying to provide flexibility for those people who are already at their floor area limits, why not increase the bonus a little bit so that they can build the minimum size ADU, which is 220 square feet. So hopefully that will go through. Reduce the height limit for ADUs located within identified Eichler tracts. So there was thinking, since Eichler neighborhoods and Eichler homes typically are much lower, their roof heights are generally within 12 feet or so versus other single-story homes that were much taller. So the thinking was to put a limit for ADU heights at 12 feet rather than the 17 feet that's currently in the code. Also note, there is a state assembly bill that would establish a limit of no less than 16 feet. So even if we do adopt a 12-foot height limit for ADUs in Eichler neighborhoods, the state code would basically eliminate that and people could go up to 16 feet. Item number 7. So clarify that replacement parking provisions also apply to JADUs. Currently, the code is a bit ambiguous as to whether JADUs can take advantage of the same provision to eliminate the reparking that regular ADUs get to do. And item number 8 is to allow replacement parking to be located within driveways located in a street side yard setback. The state code basically says that if you eliminate your parking, you can put your other, your 2-space parking requirement anywhere on the site, and our code specified within the front yard setback But what about corner lots? A lot of times their parking is accessed from the street side yard. So we are looking to council to also include that specific language that someone could park in their street side yard versus only allowing them to put their parking spaces in the front yard setback. Item number 9, allow existing driveways to be expanded to accommodate replacement parking. Currently, the language says that you can eliminate your covered parking and put your required parking spaces in the setback, but it says it has to be in an existing driveway. Well, sometimes those existing driveways may not be wide enough or long enough to accommodate your parking, and so someone could do a workaround and expand their driveway before they do an ADU and then come back and then have the space they need, or we could just amend the code and say that you can make your driveway work to accommodate your required parking. So that's the road we're trying to take, and hopefully council will go ahead and approve that. And then item number 10 is clarify when non-compliant accessory structures may be rebuilt to convert to a new ADU. So currently the code allows you to take a legally built accessory structure, such as a garage, a home office, a rec room, whatever the accessory structure may be, as long as it's legally built, it allows you to turn that into an ADU. Many of these structures were built long ago and they do not meet current building codes. They can't be used as a dwelling unit without significant modification. Oftentimes that modification actually results in the complete demolition of the structure because it has to be replaced. Currently under the code, if you remove the structure, you can't put it back in the setback. You can't reestablish any height, floor area, setback issues that may have currently existed. So there's a conflict between this provision to try to encourage ADUs within these existing structures and the code that basically wouldn't allow you to put it back the way it was before. So we're trying to get clarity from council that they would allow people to go ahead and reestablish whatever nonconformity that accessory structure had, again, providing it was legally built when it was originally established. Some other things that we're asking council to look at. The development impact fees for new housing can be fairly steep. For an ADU, it's about $10,000. So they're looking at ways to possibly waive or reduce those fees, and one of them was possibly putting a deed restriction such that you don't have to pay the fee, but then you have to subject the new ADU to being in an affordable housing program for a certain period of time. Another option was to partner with an organization that can provide the funding, but again, in exchange for having the unit be in some kind of affordable housing program for a limited period of time. Another item of discussion that people have brought up was, there are a number of illegally existing ADUs. People have built these ADUs in the past, or they buy properties that the former owner had converted either an outbuilding, a garage, or some other space into an ADU. And again, we're trying to encourage new housing, so we're looking at guidance from city council. It's like, well, are there strategies that we could employ to potentially legalize or allow people to legalize those structures that are currently illegal? And there are different ways of looking at doing that through home improvement exceptions or some kind of discretion from the director to possibly allow that to happen. Some pitfalls and things to be aware of. So building a new ADU is the same thing as building a new house, just on a smaller scale. So some people may try to go into this thinking that the process might be a little bit simpler than it really is. There are a lot of things to consider. It's not as simple as, there are prefab things products out there that you can buy, but even with a prefab product, you're gonna need to go through a building code compliance process just to make sure that everything meets current state codes. So just be aware of that when you embark in this process and not assume that the process would be simpler than it might be. We at the city certainly try to make the process as easy as possible by providing all kind of information up front. We're available down at the Development Center to answer any questions that people have. But another thing is design professionals are really essential to a smooth process. So, there's a lot of people out there, architects, designers, engineers, and they know this stuff. It's what they do. And so you should really depend on them, hire someone who has experience doing this, and they can make the process really, really smooth for you. Another thing is the development impact fees that I mentioned earlier. People don't necessarily jump into this process understanding that all new housing development is subject to that fee, and the fee, it can be quite large at about $10,000, and so just understanding that that fee is out there, it is does have to be paid before the permit can be issued, and so you want to be prepared for that as part of the whole process. And then the final thing to be aware of is that when you build a new ADU, there is a deed restriction requirement. And what that restriction is, it basically requires that you as the property owner either live in the main residence or the ADU. You don't have to rent anything out, but if you are renting it out rather than living on the property, you can only rent it out to one entity. You can't rent the ADU to someone and then the house to someone separately. The council didn't want to create this kind of absentee owner rental kind of situation, so they did require this ADU deed restriction so that the owner would either occupy the property or not be renting it out to multiple people. That's basically my presentation. I'm assuming there may be some questions, so if you have questions for me, please let me know.
What's a JADU?
So a JADU is interesting. We haven't actually seen one in the 15 months that we've been applying the new ordinance, but it's basically, it entails the conversion of an existing room, a bedroom within a home. It could entail other rooms. J stands for junior, so it's a lesser or smaller ADU. You don't have to have the bathroom in the unit. You can have a doorway from the JADU into the main residence where the bathroom would be. So the size, the fact that the bathroom doesn't have to be a part of it, and the fact that it has to comprise the conversion of an existing bedroom within the main residence are some of the key points that distinguish it from a regular ADU.
If you raise your hands, we will bring the mic to you.
Assuming you comply with the Credit Street setback, could you still have a basement that exceeds the 509 square feet maximum?
So the basement has to be under the footprint of the building, and it actually does count towards the floor area of the ADU. So if you have a 900 square foot detached ADU, you couldn't have 900 at grade and then an additional 900 in the basement. You'd have to split it.
So we have this session recorded. If we cannot hear you in the recording, would you repeat?
Repeat the question? Sure.
Yeah. So we have that.
Oh, she's got the mic back there. It doesn't sound like it's working.
Does Palo have like a one-pager that you guys give out, or like some form of like informational pamphlet?
Great
For all of the
question.
requirements?
Does Palo Alto have a one-pager that kind of explains the ADU requirements? We do, and it's at the table at the back of the room. I brought probably about 60 copies or so feel free to take one. She's got the microphone.
Do you know if the city is making any progress on developing reference ADU designs?
We currently aren't making progress on that, but that is one item that is up for discussion. I think Portland has a process where there's like 4 different designs and you can just pick one. It helps to smooth you through the building permit process. So that is on the table for discussion, but there hasn't been a lot of progress on that.
Can an existing carport in the front of a house be converted to an ADU?
Covered parking can be converted, so essentially yes, you can convert your carport into an ADU.
Does the JDU have to have an external exit? Does it have to go directly outside?
Does the JADU have to have an exterior exit? Because I haven't seen one of these yet, I don't recall if that's in the code or not. I would assume so, yes, but I couldn't be positive. I can get back to you on that.
Thanks for joining us tonight. Two questions. On the 2 parking spots, can they be in a narrow driveway, one in front of the other, or do they each have to have access?
Yes, you can do tandem parking to replace your required parking.
The second question is if there's an existing structure such as a garage in the setbacks in the rear of the property, does that work for an ADU even though it's in the setbacks?
Yes, that was one of the benefits of the original changes to the ordinance, is that you can take an existing accessory structure like a detached garage and convert it to an ADU even when it doesn't meet the new ADU requirements such as the 6-foot side yard setbacks. It's one of the big benefits that you can basically take that existing structure and convert it to an ADU.
But you have to stay in the same footprint?
You do. You couldn't expand or increase the degree of noncompliance for that structure. You can do an addition to that structure, provided that the addition meets all of the ADU requirements, such as the 6-foot setbacks. But you couldn't, say, for example, increase the length of a wall that currently doesn't meet the required setback.
If the existing structure violates the daylight plane code?
If the existing structure violates the daylight plane, yes, you can still convert it to an ADU. But again, you couldn't increase the height of that structure where it exists within the setback or violates the daylight plane.
What about converting, what about lofts? The lofts?
Lofts within an ADU?
Hello?
So she asked a question about what about converting a loft or having a loft in an ADU?
Yeah, the question was, let's say you want to convert the garage into an ADU, and then you want to put a loft above but the loft doesn't have the height of 8 feet.
Would, can you hear me? The new ADU requirements, they don't allow second floors, and so a loft is effectively a second floor.
Okay.
So while you could convert the garage to an ADU, you couldn't build in a second level within the ADU.
So,
I have 2
go to the
questions.
next one.
First one is, how would deed restrictions be enforced, and who would be responsible for enforcing them? And second question is, are ADUs required to have their own electrical, water, gas, and sewer connections?
So both very good questions. I've often wondered myself who would enforce the deed restrictions. Ultimately, some arm of the city would potentially enforce that if it was brought to our attention that the requirement was not being complied with. I imagine it would be our code enforcement department, but we don't actively have staff that is somehow patrolling the city to understand that both units might be rented to 2 separate individuals. So we would have to be notified that that was taking place and then have action move forward from there. The second question about metering, we don't require a separate meter. You certainly can work with utilities to have separate meters for the house and the ADU, but you're not required to do so. I'm sorry, what?
And the sewer connection?
The sewer connection does not have to be separate either. It could be it's with the main dwelling.
So I have a question about when you apply for an ADU, how does that affect your property tax assessment with the county?
I would actually reach out to the county to find out. So anytime that the city approves a building permit for anything, whether it's an ADU, addition to your house, it's required for the city to automatically forward those approved plans to the county, and they make their own determinations as to how that affects your property values. It's not a judgment or an assessment that the city makes. So I would assume that it would affect your property taxes, but I would definitely talk to the county because it's completely within their hands.
And a second question, of the 62 that you've gotten so far, can you give a feel of how many of them are attached or conversion of current space, like a basement of a current house versus a separate unit? How's that coming out in terms of what's being applied for and approved?
So my staff are the ones at the city that review these applications, so I haven't personally looked at them all. It's hard to have a sense for whether there's majority of applications in one camp or the other. I know that there are quite a variety of different, detached, attached. I know that we haven't had any JADUs, but whether they're in a basement or attached or detached or what their typical sizes might be, I couldn't tell you.
I can jump in and also answer that question because I crunched some numbers. So this was only for ADUs that were approved and not ADUs that are still kind of in the permitting process. But on the worksheet, can I look on to yours actually so that I can remember what it is? 53% were detached, 31% were conversions of existing space, either detached or attached, and 16% were attached additions. But that might also not be reflective of what currently is the trend in the city, because once again, those are only of ones that have been approved, not ones that are still going through the permitting process. And now my next question is here.
So can I jump in real quickly as a follow-up? This is the handout that Courtney had gone through, and this is the owner's guide to an ADU. You do want to pick up on your way out if you haven't already. And this is the handout that Russ had reviewed and approved, right?
So last summer, I took my plans down to the development office to take a look at the feasibility of taking our carport, which just has a trellis, but it's attached to the garage, into an ADU. The house was built in 2001, so it's relatively new. It's maxed to the lot. So we would only be able to do 175 square feet for the ADU. I just want to suggest that your amount of suggestion of $10,000 is low. I got a figure of nearly $14,000 for 175 square foot ADU from all the city different fees, and that comes to about $80 a square foot. We've actually built 2 houses in our married life, and we've built houses for less than that. There is a proposal, yes, to the city council to do some kind of mitigation or modification of the fees. Is that correct?
Yes, so the fees that I was referring to are specifically the development impact fee, which covers parks, community centers, libraries, traffic impact fees, public safety, facilities. It isn't the total cost that you would be looking at in terms of all the permitting costs. So there are building permit fees that would be applicable for your building permit application on top of those development impact fees. It's a different department. I don't work in that department, and so the fees are based on the valuation of the project, so I couldn't tell you what they would be, but you certainly found out what they would be for your project.
I have a question about the bonus square footage that's currently at 175 but is proposed to go to 220. And I guess my 2 questions are, how did the city come up with 175 if 220 is kind of like a common precedent? And the second question is, how likely is it that it'll move upwards, and what can we do to get it there?
Both good questions. I wasn't involved in the drafting of the ordinance, so I don't know where they came up with the 175. I know that when they were originally writing that ordinance and they were working with the building department had initially told them that the smallest ADU could be 170 square feet. In the handout at the back of the room, actually on the back page, it'll say, minimum size for an ADU is 170. They've actually amended that based on some internal discussions within the building department, but they believe per the building code that the minimum size is actually 220. And so that's why we're proposing that council amend that number. We're hopeful, it's only about 45 square feet greater than the number that they had previously adopted, so we're hopeful they'll approve it, but we'll just have to wait and see.
What is the significance of having a junior ADU as opposed to an ADU? Any benefit, any different rules, anything that's substantive?
So there's a few differences between a regular ADU and the JADU that I covered previously. Obviously, it's not that exciting of a draw because we haven't had anyone do one yet, but it was something imposed by the state. It wasn't something that the city had created and came up with. So, you know, I don't know what the state legislature was thinking when they created the option for JDU, but it does give people another option. It's a little bit more flexible. You know, you don't have to have the bathroom within the unit, so it might be easier to achieve. It also entails converting an existing bedroom within your home, and so it's potentially more cost effective. You're not building this whole new structure or even necessarily adding on to your home. You're basically converting existing space within your home to a dwelling unit by adding in a small efficiency kitchen. Is basically one of the ways to make that happen. And so conceivably it'd be a lot more affordable to do one of those than a full-blown detached or even an addition of an ADU.
You said that an existing structure that's out of compliance can be converted to an ADU as long as it was legally built.
Right, so the allowances for accessory structures are very different than for other buildings. And so you can build an accessory structure right on the property line, as long as it's 75 feet back from the street-facing property line, or from the street-facing property line, yeah. So there's a lot of buildings out there that wouldn't meet the ADU requirements that are now able to be converted to ADUs. But so as long as it was legally built and existed prior to the January 1st timeframe, those can be converted to ADUs.
My question is, what does legally built mean?
What's that?
What does legally built mean?
So it was built with a permit. So it wasn't just built, but it had a permit from the city to be built. Or predated any requirements from the city. So, you know, obviously the zoning is a lot newer than some of these existing structures. So if you can validate its existence far back in time, then we can establish that as a legally existing structure.
So it could have been built without a permit.
Conceivably, yes. But generally, the expectation is that it was something that was permitted. When it's that old and without a permit, it's very likely that it isn't going to meet any kind of building code to be viable as a dwelling. But then we're looking at making changes to even recognize those as being able to remove and put back as they currently exist.
So we have a detached 3-car garage that is permitted, but then we have an ADU that we built not permitted. How do we get that permitted now with the new rules?
Currently, we don't have a program to permit illegal units if they don't meet zoning requirements. It may be that the structure that you built, it may meet building code, it may meet the ADU setback and height requirements, so you would just need to get a hold of those code requirements and do an analysis as to whether or not the structure you built would meet code, or work with the city to find, what's that? Right, the structure's already there, but it may not meet code. So in order to legalize it, you would have to work with the city, submit drawings of what was built, and determine if it meets code and is compliant, and then we could actually issue a permit for it. If it doesn't, then we could explain to you what the issues are, and you could either address those, but then potentially you're opening yourself up to a situation where there's this illegal unit. But if we do adopt a new program, it would be helpful if the city did adopt that program to recognize those illegal units and find a way to then legalize them, even if they don't meet height, setbacks, floor area needs. Who has the microphone?
So just try to understand this a little more clearly. If you have an existing structure and you said that you have to rebuild or renovate on the footprint of that structure, then how does the bonus apply in that case? Are you allowed to exceed the existing footprint within the bounds of the 175 feet or 220 if they add that?
So we have determined that you can do additions to those existing structures that you're converting to an ADU, provided that the addition is done in a compliant manner. For example, it can't be in the 6-foot side or rear setback, provided the existing structure isn't currently or likely to, well, with the addition, you're not going to exceed the FAR allowance for the site, except for the 175 bonus. So if you have an existing house on the site and you're converting an existing detached accessory structure that might not meet the ADU requirements, you can convert that and even do an addition as long as the addition is zoning compliant.
So this is a follow-up to that question. If I wish to convert a 400 square foot garage, but it's it's an old existing structure 5 feet from my neighbor, and I wish to create a basement, is there a separate rules for the basement?
There are. So any basement construction is going to have to meet the required setbacks. So if the building is in that side yard setback, the basement can't be there. So it wouldn't be able to be under the entire footprint of the structure. It would only be able to be under the footprint of the structure where it would be zoning compliant with current requirements.
Could you please discuss the garage situation? For example, if someone's proposing conversion of a garage, do they have to turn around and build another garage for the existing unit? Or how does the covered parking requirement for the existing housing apply to this ordinance?
So this was one of the huge changes in the code. So if you were to convert an existing garage, you do not have to replace the covered parking. You still have to replace the parking spaces, but they can be in various locations around the property and they do not have to be covered. So you're gaining all of that square footage for the ADU, and you don't have to replace the covered parking, and you don't have to provide any parking for the ADU. But you do have to, those 2 spaces that were in the garage, you do have to have them somewhere on the property, either in the front yard setback or on the side of the house or somewhere. You still have to have 2 off-street parking spaces. That's correct. The ADU doesn't require any parking spaces at all.
So I have a question following that previous question on garage. Can I build a second floor ADU on top of the existing detached parking garage?
Unfortunately not. The code requirements didn't make provision to do second floor ADUs. There are a couple different zoning designations that you can, but in the standard R1 zoning designations, you can't have a new second floor ADU. Now, if you're doing a JADU where you're converting an existing bedroom that might be on the second floor of your house, in that instance, you would be resulting with a second floor ADU, but you can't go and build an ADU on the second floor, whether it's on the second floor of your house or on the second floor of your garage. You can't do a 2-story ADU.
You need an outside door. You need an outside door for the
Yes.
second story.
And that's achievable with a stairway, but they just don't allow the 2-story ADUs.
So, thank you.
Thank you. I think we are going to take one more questions. And have you asked questions? Could we just have one last questions? And Russ, would that be okay?
Yeah, happy.
Hi. So my question is, if we have an old house, old garage on the lot line, so far I understand we could convert it into an ADU, or we could replace it on the footprint, and we could use the 175 or 220 square foot bonus if we need it, as long as it's within, not in the not allowed area. But my question is, we have this old structure that exists, and we could just potentially renovate the old structure, but it itself has many things that would not meet code requirements today. Would we have to upgrade all those things, the quality of the walls and the quality of the this and that, if we decided to do that, in which case it would be better to tear it down and just build a new building? Or?
Right, that's what oftentimes happens with these older structures. They have dry rot, they have termite damage, there's all kinds of issues. The plumbing, the electrical, well, if there's plumbing, or even if there's electrical, isn't up to code, and the structural integrity of the building isn't up to code. There's no waterproofing. A lot of times these structures were built on dirt floors, and they don't have concrete foundations. So many times when someone is doing one of these conversions, we've found that it ultimately ends up in the replacement of the structure rather than some kind of augmentation, and we've been allowing people to do that. But that is in conflict with other parts of the zoning, and so one of the changes, well, not a change to the code, but a clarification that we have proposed was that we allow people to do that in those scenarios, and we wanted the code language to be clear that that is okay. But until that changes, we have been allowing people to go ahead and remove that structure and build it back to its previous configuration.
But if you wanted to work in the existing structure, you still have to bring all those things up to code.
You must bring it up to current code, and this is per building department, the state building code. You can't turn something into a dwelling unit that is likely to fall down, burn down, or be some kind of nuisance because people inside are getting mold, Yeah, it does have to be up to code.
So with that note, thank you so much. Would everybody please give Russ a round of applause?
And if there are further questions, I work for the city. Feel free to contact me. The handout at the back of the room has the phone number for planner on duty and email. So if you can email the city if there's other questions, we'd be happy to respond to those. Yeah, I'm going to stick around till the end. So.
And I also wanted to just remind everybody, Russ is coming to join us tonight at his own free time. So we really appreciate he taking the time to join us tonight. People were asking, can we share the slides that you went through just a moment ago? Can we share those?
Yeah, feel free to use that information.
So if you're interested, please make sure that we have your registration in the back, and we will contact you and update you with any of the ADU news. And we are thinking maybe if there's enough interest, we could organize some sort of a resource and for people to exchange ideas. So thank you so much, Russ. And we are going to now bring up our panel. So we invited 4 people to join us for tonight's presentation, and that is Judith. Judith, are you here? Judith and also Anna. Anna, would you please come forward? And St. Charlie and Kristen. Kristen, are you here? Hi. Would you please come up here? Yes.
Turn down the volume of the mic, there's a lot of echo.
Okay, thank you. That really appreciated. Our staff is here with us to help us with the room temperature control and also the volume control. So, thank you so much. We have a panel that we have 2 architects, and one is a designer and also practitioners. That they all have experiences of helping their clients doing an ADU in Palo Alto. So they have very specific experiences they can share with us. So Judith, we'll start with you.
Oh, really? Okay, hi, everybody. My name is Judith Wasserman. Lived in Palo Alto since 1968. I got my license in 1986, and since 1994, I've been designing buildings and houses and remodels and additions up and down the peninsula. The ADU that I think they're moving in next week, was my maiden voyage, and it had some very interesting aspects to it. It was a garage conversion. And the first question I had was, well, what does that mean? Somebody just asked, why have this building? Nothing meets code. Does that mean I have to bring it up to code? Well, if you bring it up to code, you have to put sheathing on the walls that makes the building bigger by an inch does that still qualify as a conversion? And so, because it was so new to the city, getting the planning people to agree on what a conversion was and what we were allowed to do and what we weren't allowed to do took a little while, but the upshot of it was that a garage conversion means that you keep the size and shape of the building, and you don't make it any closer to your property lines than the original building, even if you start with a whole new structure, which we ultimately did, because there was nothing in that building that met code. There were a couple of other surprises. We discovered that the development impact fee for what was an existing structure was going to be close to $10,000. Now, I think that the city is re-examining this, and if not, they should. And we've also had some interesting building inspector issues. Just today, I think, we had an electrical inspection by a guy who apparently had to bring his book with him because he'd never inspected anything before. Which means, of course, that Bud's coming out tomorrow.
She's looking at you, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, he doesn't do inspections, but he knows old people. So that I found working on this project to be a lot of fun. It was 400 square feet, very square, 20 by 20, and we needed a bathroom, we needed a kitchen, we needed a place to sleep, and a place to do other stuff. And we also needed a heating system. We needed a water heater. We needed to meet Title 24 with all those things. And, oh yeah, in the middle of working on this, they told us that we had to meet the Green Building Code for a new building. Whereas an ADU does not have to meet the Green Building Code hardly at all. It just has to do mandatory. So that became an interesting moment. So my suggestion, if you're going to do any of these things, is to ask a lot of questions and ask in all the different areas of permitting that you will be involved in. It also helps to have an experienced general contractor who knows how to work with the city, because otherwise he's just going to, this is all still pretty new. It's only like the second year since the state passed the law. So everybody's kind of figuring this out. And the city of Palo Alto has maintained that it wants to do these things. So it's up to us to keep reminding them that that's what they're supposed to do.
So thank you, Judith. Next we are going to introduce Kristen. So Kristen, thank you. We understand that you have a lot of experiences here, and we'll go through your slides.
Okay, I can't see my slides for back, but you can go through them. Well, I'm Kristen Harrison, Harrison Design, and I describe
hold the mic up a little closer.
Kristen Harrison, Harrison Design. I was born in Palo Alto in 1948. I've been doing residential design and build since 1988. And I've done 3 ADU, well, I completed 1 ADU, an attached ADU. We've currently just broken ground on a detached ADU. And I'm in the planning stages on a garage conversion ADU, detached garage conversion ADU. And Judith certainly, I would second everything Judith said. In terms of working with the city, asking questions, there were definitely surprises. In our particular case, the project that's a new construction, in fact, my client is here tonight, and we very complicated. When we started the project, we were tearing down a detached garage and a carport. And at the time, the city's position was that if we converted the garage, we didn't need to replace the parking. But if we were tearing it down and rebuilding it, we did need to replace the parking. So we spent some time designing an ADU that had a covered parking space attached to it. And it was just by happenstance, I went into planning to ask a question, and the planner said, oh, by the way, do you know you don't need to have this parking space? And I said, what are you talking about? I've been here 3 times arguing the rationale of this, and I was told absolutely new building, you have to keep the parking space. So that just miraculously solved a lot of problems for us, although we did have to go back to the design board slightly. But so, because, I mean, it's exciting to be involved in a new ordinance, and it's kind of cutting edge, but there's some frustrations associated with that, because it's being debugged like any new law. There are unintended consequences that have to be addressed. And I was really pleased to see the list that Russ discussed about possible changes. I particularly like the 175 moving to 220. That does seem to make sense. And the impact fee is shocking. $10,781 is what we've had to pay for our 2 that are one completed, one just starting. And that was, it would be nice to see that prorated, because on a, if you're building a 900 square foot house in your backyard, $10,000 isn't a huge percentage increase on the cost of the project. But if you're doing a junior, which you could conceivably do for $15,000, adding $10,700 to it. Well, if you're just a junior ADU, converting a bedroom, adding a galley little mini kitchen, and well, you can use an existing bathroom. So, I mean, the juniors, which don't seem to be very popular, there's a wide, you could keep the budget down on that. They do have some limitations on the kitchens too. In the junior, I think you have to have can't have a 220 range. You have to have a 120 range, something like that. But anyway, so the first project that we finished, and the tenants are moving in this week. It was 2 existing rooms.
Excuse me. We are talking about your Nathan Way.
This is Nathan Way, yeah. There were 2 existing rooms. They were connected to the garage, so they were on a slab. The house was on a raised floor foundation, and they were already heated, so we weren't adding conditioned space. And we converted that. It was, what do I have up there? 405 square feet, I think. And we converted that we put in a kitchen, a bathroom, a little walk-in closet, washer, dryer, and then a sitting sleeping area. And it turned out very well. Our biggest problem there was we needed an ejector pump to pump sewage to tie into the main house lateral in the front yard. And so we had to get around the house. And then there's a new requirement for this backflow device. I have a picture of it. It's a very ugly thing that if you have an ejector pump, this metal backflow device has to be in your front yard within 2 feet of the property line. So for a lot of people, that ends up in their lawn or in a flower bed. So that's been a bit objectionable. But whenever you're converting, pardon me? This is new. We just got caught up. I mean, we just told them.
They're going to ask us.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big. It stands about this high. I mean, it's big. It's ugly.
Okay, so Russell, just to clarify, it's not his department, so.
I know. And when we complained to the inspector, he said it was our responsibility to keep track of changes. So I was just asking him if he wanted to have a call daily to see if there are any changes I should know about. But one of the challenges of a detached ADU is that you have to connect the sewer line from that ADU to the main house sewer line outside the building. It has to be in the front lateral. You can't connect it to the house. You used to be able to go into the house and just, so you pump the sewer from the detached building into the main house line. Can't do that anymore. So that's a bit of an expense. You end up boring or trenching from the detached ADU, which is usually in the back of the property, all the way to the front of the property. So that's expensive to do that. So that was probably the biggest financial surprise after the fee. for
We
this
see a
project.
lot of nodding heads at that. Looks like it's a consensus on the
Yeah.
panel.
Yeah, and the project that is just currently started building, the 872 square foot detached building, is very much like, as Russ said, building a house. I mean, it is a whole house. It's a kitchen and a bathroom and a bedroom and a living room and a little office and a storage area. And we are hit with green building, Cal Green Tier 2, yeah.
And that is the next project?
That's the one that's starting now, yeah.
Okay.
And that was Tier 2, so that means an outside consultant. And
There's a Santa Rita Avenue?
this is, no, not Santa Rita, this is one that's in the design phase. It's the Cerrito Way.
Okay.
And so that's a trapezoidal shaped lot, so that was tricky. But there was really only one place for this detached ADU, and that's where the old detached garage was. So we've torn that down, and this is where the ADU is going. But our other big challenge was the trees. The whole thing is under a canopy of a protected redwood. I mean, the property has redwoods on two sides. So that made our arborist, critical in explaining to the city how we were going to protect the trees, the roots during construction, everything like that. So very grateful to Rob Weatherall of Advanced Tree Care. Great guy. The other problem we've had with this, and this is a problem that I'm hoping is going to be addressed, is that most heating systems now come with air conditioning included, whether you're doing a heat pump or mini split kind of a thing. And when you're doing a detached unit, it's in the rear part of the property, and we're not allowed to put air conditioning condensers in the 20-foot, or in the side or rear yard setback, which is tricky if your entire structure is in the rear yard setback. So I'm hoping that there's going to be some relief on that maybe. But, and
So
maybe
we
Russ
got a
has some
response
input.
right away.
So this is a really interesting scenario that you brought up. I've actually made an executive decision, and I've been approving the equipment as long as it's not in the 6-foot side yard setback for an ADU. I've been allowing them if the entire structure is in the 20-foot rear setback. If there is a portion of the structure that is not in the 20-foot setback, then it's expected that the equipment will be located adjacent to that point of the structure. But if it's wholly in the 20-foot setback, there's nowhere else for it to go, then I've been approving that.
Okay, that's helpful. They're not particularly, not necessarily in this project, but.
Is that follow-up question?
Yeah, follow-up. It seems to me that this is about noise. Why don't you just govern it by decibels? I mean, our equipment
Because the mini
is
splits are
practically silent, and they made us put it, virtually in the front of the house, and it's ugly, and it's a stupid decision.
This is a code imposed by council that it can't be in a required setback.
So could we add that to our list that we're going to discuss with council? Maybe.
I think anyone is free to petition council to amend that ordinance. It would make our life at the planning department easier.
I actually
because it is a
have
frustrating concern for people to not be able to have a place to put their condensing unit.
Lucas Morton.
A lot of times they
Closed
end up
something
on the roof
Monday
of the
night,
building.
and they were going to, Dan was going to present it. They
So
didn't get
thank
to
you
it,
so
but
much.
he got-
And so
I've
that-
got it in my bag.
I just wanted to point out to everybody that this is the area where the public input will come to help. And so, that is just to echo the introduction that Eric started out with, that the city is opening the opportunity, but it is up to us, the public, to help shape it.
And the other thing that hasn't come up is that surveys are often required for these, because Palo Alto's become much more rigorous about requiring surveys when you're doing anything that's close to a setback. So in this case, it would be 6-foot setbacks, but it's happening in additions to main residences also. Used to be more often, if the fences were in good shape, they were kind of assumed to be the property lines. But nowadays, more surveys are being required, which is, can be $3,000, $4,000 item. So there are soft costs associated with all building projects, but some of these ADUs kind of are hit with all of them. We've got, it's expensive.
And next we're going to talk about your Santa Rita.
The Santa Rita project is a house and garage built in 1928, 28 little detached Tudor-style garage, and we're going to, so it's only 270 square feet. And of the projects, it's actually on a per square foot basis could end up being the most expensive because it's a lot of bathroom and kitchen, which is expensive square footage compared to the amount of just walk around area. And but we're just in the early stages of that. But we'll have an air conditioning unit problem, so we have to deal with where we're going to put that. And but it's got a high roof ceiling, so we can put some skylights in. It'll be a cute little space, but the other ones are more usable for living.
Thank you so much, Kristen. That is just so much information that you share with us. It's really nice. And next, we are going to go to Shanchali, and you have also an ADU that you are going to share with us.
Hello everyone, my name is Sanchali Srivastav. I'm owner of Stan Interior Design, and I'm basically a designer, and I've done a couple of ADU projects, but only one in the city of Palo Alto, which is right now in the permit process. So we've been through the first set of plan check comments, and now we are going to submit for the second review.
Who did your plan?
Which one? The building, the planning?
The building.
The building, it's under review with Medan. I don't know if you matter. Medan? Medan? And I'm also a certified interior designer as well. I have done a couple of other ADU projects which are already built in other cities, and some of them were like converting existing space of the house into an ADU. One more project that I did was attaching an ADU, new ADU, to a garage space. So, and this one that we are doing in Palo Alto, that's like a 900 square feet ADU, and it's a detached structure, so that's like a new construction project. And this lot is in the flood zone, so I'll be also talking a little bit about what we expect in flood zones, a little different than what you would in other projects. And I would also like to touch a little bit upon the design process. I mean, everybody's design process is slightly different, how an architect would handle it, how a design bid firm would handle it. I'm a designer, so this is how we approach projects. Like the first meeting with the client is to get the information on the budget and their requirements. And after that, after they accept the proposal, my proposal, then I go back to the site and do the measurements of the whole house, which is existing, the lot, and create an existing floor plan first. And then we start discussing on the design options with the homeowner and go back and forth in trying to finalize a design. And once we have a design in place, at that point, we take a preliminary estimate from the contractor. So none of the contractors will give you like a final number on the estimate till they see a full set of drawings with the structural, Title 24, everything. But some of them will give like a preliminary estimate, which will give you some kind of a budget range of your project. And at that point, we also take a proposal from the structural engineer. So structural engineer is required for all the drawings which are related to the foundation, shear walls, roof framing, so anything to do with the structure. And we also need a Title 24 energy consultant for this project. So that is basic, Title 24 energy calculations is basically what your building envelope does in terms of meeting the current energy codes. So how much of glass area is there in the building, what type of insulation is going, and is it all meeting the building codes or not. So all these consultants, various consultants are required during the whole process. Once we have all these drawings from the structural engineer, from Title 24, and if we require all other, like for detached, we also require the design professional, which is for the green building. So that we were required the civil drawings for the drainage plan, grading and drainage plans, civil engineers, and then the surveyor, so everything put together, and that becomes like a full set of drawings which I take to the city and have the plan check approved. So that is under my umbrella, and once those drawings are approved, then we also send those drawings as PDFs. I mean, it is sent to various contractors if the homeowner is taking like multiple bids, and at that point, the contractor is able to give, the final bid. And those full set of drawings, then the contractor goes to the city and they pull the permit, and then the construction process starts. So my role is till, till the whole permit is approved, I help the homeowner through that process. And obviously, if there are questions during construction as well, which are related to my drawings, I definitely go on the site and check on those as well. So this is kind of a basic sketch of what this lot is. It's like a cul-de-sac lot, and it's a pie-shaped lot. You see the existing house in the middle, and we place the ADU, detached ADU in the rear. Now, just because of all these weird angles, I mean, you can see that trying to place an ADU in those acute angles, it definitely was a little challenging, but we were able to get those 6 feet setbacks and place the 900 square feet ADU, because that was kind of, the homeowner wanted to push it as much back as possible, because that was kind of a wasted corner for them. You also see that there are easements. So sometimes you have to be really aware of if there is like 1 easement, 2 easements. Sometimes, like for here, there was only like 1 easement on the site, which was 5 feet wide. But sometimes there are like 2 easements. They can be like a 10 feet easement. And if you were thinking that you will be able to place your ADU all the way till 6 feet, maybe you cannot, because the city will not allow you to encroach into the easements for building. So you have to be completely aware of these other restrictions that might be there on your lot when you're placing these ADUs. Yeah. So this is kind of a sketch of what the layout we came up with. And the living and the kitchen area right up in the front, and we went with a slightly more fancier design for the layout of this ADU and the design of the ADU in terms of architectural details, because the homeowner's intent is that right now maybe he'll rent it out, but maybe in the long run, after the kids leave for college, they might move into this ADU. So he wanted to make it very spacious and with vaulted ceilings everywhere, in the bedrooms as well as in the living areas. We have vaulted ceilings. There are 2 bathrooms, and then that little corner, because of all these acute angles, and trying to maximize the spaces and make it very efficient in the design, so that you see that little laundry area that we took out. That was kind of because of these angles that we had. And this is the front elevation of that ADU. So because of it being in the flood zone, you can see that the height is raised, because it needs to be above the base flood elevation. And that's why you see those couple of steps. And we still have to meet the maximum height which is allowed for the ADU. And so, but we were able to achieve it even with a 9 feet ceiling, just because of the design and the layout of the ADU that we did. And I mean, there are flood vents, and we did require a green building special inspector as well, just like she was stating, it's required for all these new construction projects. And we were required a survey as well, a topo survey, because even for the grading plan, they need all the points of how the site is elevated and how it is going to drain and everything. So pretty much it for now.
Thank you. That was a very detailed discussion. We will not do Palo Alto justice without talking about historic. So, Anna, please tell us your story.
Hi.
I don't think that's on.
All right. I've been practicing in the area since 1994, mostly custom residential homes, and like my colleagues here, been dealing and grappling with the ADU conundrum that we all think is a great idea. I've had experience of permitted ADUs in other parts of the peninsula, in unincorporated Menlo Park and City of Menlo Park. And this, I have a ADU that we just recently received an approval for construction in Professorville. It's been a long process and one that has been an interesting process, I shall say. To echo everything that you've heard here tonight, because it's such a new ordinance, people are scrambling to try to figure out how to enforce the ADU ordinance. And you add to that the historic component, it becomes really complicated. The clients had bought a historic 1901 house, and they set out to remodel. It's a contributed structure on the historical register, and we went about doing all that. So we weren't thinking about doing an ADU. In fact, we couldn't do an ADU at that time because the lot did not, it was too small for the ADU. It wasn't 10,000, it was 9,898 or something. Once the ordinance passed that they relaxed the maximum lot or the minimum lot size, the clients thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we could get an ADU? And so we started exploring the whole ADU concept. We went and talked to planners. We know that we need to ask a lot of questions many times to different people, and invariably you get 3 different answers. So you ask the question again. And we went on our way. We had a planner who was helping us through this process. And at the time, the conversion of what we initially submitted and was approved was a garage. Now we wanted to do an ADU attached to the one-car garage. So they told us this is a pretty simple process, it's just a revision. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and do that. It sounds really
Sounds like a free lunch.
Sounds fabulous. And so we told the good news to our clients. We were thrilled because we were going to add now about 500 square feet of livable area to the 200 square foot one-car garage. And off we went. We did our designs in the manner that we thought was compatible with our historic home. Let me just back off a little bit and say that the clients we're interested in maintaining the historic character of the house as required in terms of front facade, side facade, but the rear, it was fair game, and they wanted to really kind of blow it open and make it more modern. So we had gone down that path and spent about a year and a half getting the house approved. So now we have this house that is historic on the front, and now there was a long process. It's not completely modern. There was some compromises that we made, but it's compatible and it works well and it fits the client's desires. We're designing the ADU, and we designed what we thought went along with the design that we had come up with for the clients. It's in the rear. You cannot see it. The garage was not historic. We submit the plans, and we get some pushback from the new historic consultant to the city, who thought that our design was not compatible with the Secretary of the Interior. And now so this is all just telling the story that the cautionary tale is that Secretary of the Interior, we were able to get the main house approved through all of the hoops and satisfy the requirements, but now here we're doing this small ADU, in the rear that nobody can see and became the biggest hurdle in this whole process, 3-year process we've been doing. So in the end, we had to redesign the ADU 3 or 4 times, and it felt, it was very frustrating because we felt we were at the mercy of some consultants that hired by the city to enforce a rule, but not necessarily, it was very subjective. And at some point we were ready to just go in front of the next review board, would be the Historic Resource Board, HRB, because the clients were like, this is ridiculous, this is wrong, they cannot tell us what to do, we have spent so much time and effort, we have a great architect, what is happening here, why is the city telling us that? So we calm them down and we figure, okay, let's do a few compromises and go back and submit, and we got to a common place where, you know, they approved it, and then we learned that we had to, oh wait, by the way, you need to conform to the green building. Oh, well, that wasn't part of it. Oh, well, it is part of it now. So then, back and forth, back and forth. So it was a long process. It's finally approved. We have not started construction. I apologize, I have no slides because Amy roped me into this late last night. And I wish I could have shown the different iterations and just kind of provided a visual of what we were proposing, which in our view was fairly inoffensive and fitting with the architecture. But so I guess the message is that yes, it requires a lot of steps, and if it's complicated outside of the historic zone of Palo Alto, when you get somewhere where there's some historic overview, it's going to be even more of an uphill battle. So I would, you know, advise that you do all your homework up front, hire good professionals to help out, and arm yourselves with a lot of patience and courage, because it does take that.
Sense of humor goes a long way.
That too. That too. So in the end, well, it started with Matthew Weintraub, and then he left. And then there was Emily Vance, and midway through our review process and flurry of, you know, 100 pages of emails back and forth, how are we doing? Do you like this new design that we're sending you? She disappeared, and then we learned later that she's no longer with the city. So here we are, have gone through all these hoops, and the person who was trying to enforce that is no longer there. So it's just part of, you know, part of the course. It's just what it is. People are trying to do their job, but so are we on behalf of our clients, and we want more ADUs. And we felt that the process is still in its infancy in terms of being able to facilitate and streamline something that ought to be pretty straightforward, and well, that we all know that it's not, but it's at the beginning. So hopefully with the community, Palo Alto Forward, and the people who are pushing this through and attending city council, and people like Russ, who's willing to come here, we can do that together. And I wish that there could be more of a conversation amongst professionals and the city, and I guess it's happening. It's just not as fast as we all would like. Thank you.
It's also, I just wanted to add one thing, that, I mean, this is all happening in a time where, I mean, I don't think the Bay Area has ever had as much building going on as it does right now. So all the building departments are completely stretched thin. The building inspectors are being brought out of retirement. I mean, I had a guy who doesn't, hey, he's been retired for 2 different code changes. He wasn't up to speed on anything. And he was plans checking. And so it's a hard time, and and you know, frustration and long delays and waiting to talk to people, and you know, I try to minimize the number of trips I make to the city because I never know how long I'm going to be there before I can talk to somebody. But on the other hand, trips to the city are really important. It's really important to have a planner to work with, and we do get a planner identified for our projects. And it's just important just to keep a tight communication because things are evolving. And I feel terrible about just experience there. But the green, this whole green issue, we're supposed to make these ADUs compatible with the primary structure, but then you have a green component thrown in, and often your roof. I mean, we can't match the roof on our big house on our ADU on Cerrito Way because wood roofs don't pass green. You can't have a wood shingle roof. So if we're gonna and you can't have a dark comp roof. So it's hard to make buildings compatible when they've got when you've got solar reflective indexes to meet and things like that. So it's
Well, thank you. That was very helpful. And so the purpose of the panel is for us to have some experience sharing. And now that we have you on stage, would you let us know what is the biggest the challenge that you have, and what is the most rewarding experience that in constructing the ADUs, and what is the one just like one sentence advice that you would give to our public that is like interested? And shall I start with Judith?
Okay, so there are a couple of frustrating things in the different parts of the process. In the permitting part, the frustrating bit was that nobody could seem to decide which set of rules we were operating under. And this seems to be a pattern. First they say you don't have to meet, if you're converting the garage, you don't have to meet the energy reach code, which was 10% more than the state rule. And then you turn around, they tell you have to meet tier 2. And, I just happen to have a really good energy consultant, and we didn't have to change anything except for the conduit to the photovoltaic panels that we are never going to have because we're under several
trees,
protected trees.
Right.
So,
my project, solar's not going to go under those.
So my advice is, when you're thinking about the codes, ignore the concept of logic. Because it doesn't apply. But the other frustrating thing just happened today when we got, they went through, the regular inspector that we have wasn't available. The electrical inspector that had been reviewing this project all along also wasn't available. We got this idiot. I don't know where he came from. He's a contract guy. He shows up with a code book. It's like, what is that? So, the rewarding thing was that a really good contractor, the thing is as cute as a button. It is in Professorville behind a house from 1905, and it looks like it's always been there. And yet it meets every code that you could possibly imagine. Structural, energy, green building, electrical, all that stuff. And it needs electrical code, in spite of what that guy says. So, it turned out quite well. It was expensive. It was more expensive than anyone really expected. And that had a lot to do with soft costs and things like, how do you get your gas line from the diagonally opposite side of the lot to the ADU, which is over here, without going under the house?
Up and over.
Yes. No, it's out in the yard. And we did a lot of digging. There were a lot of holes in that yard.
We're talking about frustrations, but there really are fun parts too. And one of the things I think is I love designing small houses. And it's a real puzzle, and to try to you have to be clever to make things work efficiently and feel bigger than they are. And it's wonderful to have this opportunity to do this on do large numbers of small houses, which is what I think the ADU is going to allow us to do. I do love that part of it.
And you took the same concept I was going to say when we were done designing the ADU and finally the frustration of going back and forth. Oh, there was one more funny part, I guess funny now, where after the flurry of emails back and forth to our planner, who was actually great throughout the process, trying to do his best, but he also couldn't, he didn't have any jurisdiction over the historic review planner. Finally, everything is approved, and we say, hooray, you can go. The owner said, I'm going to march down there and get my permit. There's one more thing you got to do, and there's this paperwork that needed to be recorded, deed or something notarized. Yes, and so the client ran and got it done and something, and got it back to us. We returned it to the city. About a week later, we still haven't heard, so we emailed the planner. And he goes, you guys are not going to believe this, but we can't find the paperwork. So it was like adding insult to injury. What? So we have to do this all over again. And at this point, I mean, to what Kristen is saying, the cities, the jurisdictions are spread so thin that you have some compassion sometimes, as you understand, we're all human. We are doing the best we can. And I know that it was, this he felt terrible telling us that, but anyway, that's fine.
Sure.
But when we were done doing the ADU, the clients liked it so much. It was so compact and so efficient and so well designed. And they said, why did we need to do such a big house? We could just moved in something this small, and then maybe we'll just rent out the big house and move into the ADU.
Yeah. Well, that's what happened to my clients too, that in the course of designing the ADU, they were thinking about a rental, but as they got into it, it started looking better to them than their old house, which hasn't been remodeled recently. So now they're getting extremely attached to it, and they're designing it for themselves, really, for when they retire, and then they'll rent out the bigger house. And that's a very fun thing, to watch clients become attached to something, and they really own it. It's not something we're designing and superimposing on them. They're part of the process, and they're in it, and that makes it worthwhile.
And I was going to say it's going to take longer and it's going to cost more than you think. So just be prepared.
But Palo Alto lead times, I mean, once you submit, they prompt pretty good at getting back within the 4 weeks. And for the first comments, and then there'll be some responses that are, but I just submitted a set of plans to Santa Clara County, and they're 12 weeks to get to the first comments. And that's basically the summer. And they're, so Palo Alto is nowhere near the most frustrating.
Well, that's such a notable Palo Alto.
And also, like other cities do not allow this. Some of the cities, like city of San Jose, they don't allow this 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom. They just allow like a 1-bedroom thing. So, I mean, in Palo Alto, we are blessed that they allow like a bigger ADU with 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. One experience that I'll share about this project that we are doing in the ADU. So initially when I took the site measurements and I started laying out in CAD, I noticed that there was something off in the site dimensions, because from the county records, when I superimposed the parcel map, it looked like some of the, one of the property lines was probably off, Now, I could not tell without the survey whether it was left, right, which one, because we were going to place that ADU in that corner, right? So it was critical to know if we are leaving like 6 feet from the property line, where that property line is. So after we had the survey, it was determined that the right property line was off by 10 feet. So, the fence was actually fortunately, the fence was into our lot. That means that the homeowner had like 10 more feet into the neighbor's property. So, as a result of this, the homeowner actually took that survey to the, his neighbor. And he said that here is the license survey. I have 10 more feet of space. So I would be moving the fence into that part, So that the neighbors day, my client, he just brought the fence guy and moved it over. So now he is enjoying like 400 more square feet of space, and you can imagine what that does in Palo Alto, all that land space, right? So that was one upside. But what the message I want to give you is, if this property line was actually anywhere close to the ADU area, if it was going to be off, the whole design would have changed. So the message that I want to give is, do this survey even before you start the design, because these property lines become so critical in the design and determining, especially if you're going very close to the property lines. I mean, these property lines can be off by a big margin, like 10 feet is a big thing. So,
That's big. You usually get,
yeah, no, I've had like 4 feet also in Palo Alto. I mean, one of my clients is sitting here, and his property line was off by 4 feet. So, yeah.
So thank you so much. I think at this point we are going to take some questions from the audience. If you have questions, would you please raise your hand, and Courtney will come to you.
Hello? Okay, that's working. Okay, great. We have one question back here.
Actually, I think a few. What are the property setbacks defined by the city? How do you define them? Because I understand it will be by recorded documents, not by the city. Can you define?
Well, you can
Is that a question? Is that a question for the,
Yes,
the panel?
yes. I'd like to know if there are property setbacks that the city would set forward, because when I've gone down before, they say, no, it's between owners, and you have to have a boundary set by surveillance.
Okay, the
By surveillance.
setback, so we're talking about a whole bunch of different lines. The most important set of lines are your property lines. That's what the surveyor will determine. He will he will set pins in the corners of your property line. The setbacks are set by the city. An ADU setback is 6 feet from the side property line and 6 feet from the rear property line, not counting mechanical equipment, which is at the moment up for grabs. And those are setbacks. The easements have to do with where the utility lines are running. Usually those are 5 feet, but you've got to check them, and you've got to go in to the development center and talk to somebody who knows, talk to somebody from utilities to find out where the easements are. There's something called a parcel map that is not very useful. The parcel reports say things like, well, you can't do this if you have easements, but we're not going to tell you if you have easements or not. So, it'll just give you a general map with some numbers on it. But if you want to know what your easements are, you need to go to utilities.
Appropriate organizations or utilities to check with.
The setbacks are 6 feet, regardless. Let's start from the beginning again. Say you have a rectangular lot. You've got property lines that were determined a long time ago. A surveyor can tell you exactly where they are. They may or may not be on your fences. Your front property line is probably not at the sidewalk. It's probably several feet behind it. At my house, that is 5 feet. I've seen it any number of different feet. Do you need a survey? Start with a survey. The setbacks are 6 feet from the back and 6 feet from the side for an ADU. And if you want to find out about easements, go to the utilities department. But you can't, there's nobody to ask about setbacks. They just are what they are. They don't change. Good. the surveyor will set the corners of your building once you decide where it goes.
Thank you.
Most homeowners have finite resource and most architects do not work for free. How do I get into a project and know that I can actually be able to afford it in the end? What are the ways to minimize the upfront cost to make sure that I can actually complete the project?
I've got my little mini one. The way I work is that, I do an initial meeting with the client, and we kind of like a first date, and if we like each other, and talk about their project. I also try to get some sort of budget, expectation out of them. It doesn't have to be all the money they've got in the world, just how much do they want to spend on this project. And then we compare, I ask for a wish list. What would you like to accomplish? What do you want to spend? And then we see whether it's feasible. So, maybe are we going to get half of the items on your list, or we can't do it all? Then we come up with a preliminary plan very quickly, very little time spent on me. And I have a contractor that builds almost all my projects for the last 5 years. And he will then give us an estimate based on that minimal plan, filling in a lot of blanks just by virtue of his experience. And we're not looking for a lowball number, we're looking for an accurate number in terms of reasonableness. And then we reconvene and say, okay, have we hit our target, or do we have to save $5,000 somewhere, or are we good to go? And then we expand up. The minimizing upfront costs, a lot has to do with how clearly you communicate with your architect or designer. Because miscommunications or changes involve in revised drawings, and that's just time and money. So I think good communication and having a good idea of what you want to accomplish and communicating that is a good way to use the design time efficiently.
Some of us work on an hourly basis, and some of us work on a fixed fee. And when you interview architects and designers, that's a question you should ask, because sometimes it's just more comfortable to know upfront how much the architect is going to cost you and what that covers and what the extras are. And so, and there's a written contract. Read it carefully. And just know that if that about 15% of your budget will go into soft costs, you need to subtract that out from the amount of money you have, and that will be your construction budget because of all these consultants and all the city fees.
You sort of need to come up with a construction budget in order to know what 15% is.
Yeah.
So the budget process is.
Yeah. And also always keep a buffer in your budget, about 10 to 15%, because during construction, most of the project go over. So if you're planning all the way to the end, then it's going to be a problem.
Are there websites or books you would recommend? Excuse us, I think that's probably an answer. Yeah.
When there's so many multi-million-dollar projects in this area available for contractors, how do you interest someone in a small project which has its own complexities? It's not a piece of cake.
I can answer that to some extent. Multi-million-dollar projects not all contractors are even looking for those projects. Multi-million-dollar huge houses tend to be built by contractors who are almost more commercial contractors. They need a much tighter organization in order to pull off a project that size. A lot of contractors aren't interested in that. They don't have that kind of office structure that can run a job that big, and they love little projects. And it's a personality trait, all difference also. Some contractors like the challenge of remodeling, and others just want to start from scratch and, don't bother me with tie-ins to anything existing. But there are a lot of contractors around. I mean, the guys that I Jill Perry from San Jose. They do multi-million-dollar projects, $2 million, $3 million houses, not 50,000 square foot houses, but but they also love small jobs, and they know that, when times get tough, everybody, if you want to keep in business, you got to do small projects. So they do a mix of them, quite gladly.
Okay, so Anna has one more too.
Yeah, and to add to what Kristen just said is some contractors really enjoy the crafting of the building. They're really in it to be partners and figuring out the details. They really, truly love the art of building. And sometimes you find contractors who are trying to get started. They used to work for bigger contracting firms, and they're going to go out on their own, but they don't have anything built. And so people are like, well, why should I trust you? So don't be afraid to give somebody a chance, meet them, see how you like them, and if it feels like it's you get along and there's his style or her style resonates, and you feel you can trust them, then I would say give them a chance, because we have found some of our best kind of contractors when we couldn't find anybody because everybody was so busy for the smaller jobs, and they've been phenomenal. Now they're doing our bigger jobs. So
I know that there are a lot of questions still left in the audience. I'm going to take the one question from up here, but I'm sure some of our panelists will be sticking around after we finish up kind of the formal segment if you still have questions to ask, and they'd be happy to answer your questions then. But I'll go to my last question.
Are there books or websites you recommend about small houses?
There are books. Google small houses images, and you'll get pictures. And there are books. Kepler's has got a Stanford Library used to have a Stanford bookstore used to have a book. But there are lots of books out there.
The internet is full of.
Yeah, the internet is.
Yeah, I just was wondering if there's anybody in particular.
There's
Tiny Homes.
Tiny Homes.
Yeah.
The tiny book of tiny homes. Very cute.
There's a book called The Not So Big
Big
House
Right.
by Sarah Suzanka.
She has about 5 books now.
Yeah, but that's the
That's the
best
first
one.
one, the
That's
best
the
one.
one with the flowers. And then if you like her stuff, just read the rest of them. But it's not specifically about small houses. It's about a way of thinking.
There's a book on specifically on ADUs. It's called Backdoor Revolution, and this is written by Cole Peterson. He is kind of like a guru in the Portland area for ADUs. He does these workshops and coaches people on ADU material as well. So that is one resource. And this book is pretty new. Like in 2018 January, this was released, so it is pretty much current on the information for now. So that is something that maybe you can look into.
Also, I found when looking for appliances for this ADU kitchen was 10 feet long, that apartment appliances, RV appliances, there are resources that don't occur to you until you start looking. The internet is kind of amazing lately.
So thank you so much for our panel. Thank you so much for taking the time to come. And I am sure if you have any questions, that they'll stick around and share your information. But don't go away yet, because I still have one more story to tell. And we have Corey Woolbach, who is our councilman, who just popped in to say hello, and he's one of the housing advocates and who helped to craft the ADUs. So,
well, thanks for giving me just a minute. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for coming, and thank you for everybody on our panel and Alta Board for organizing this. I'm sorry we missed the beginning of this, but I just want to say that we are making progress as a city in making accessory dwelling units more accessible. And it's been a long struggle, starting from the campaign in 2014, where we started talking about this on the campaign trail, and people said you're crazy, or that'll never help, or who's that going to be for, to introducing legislation and having people say, oh, that's too radical, what do you mean you don't roll for these? Where are they going to park? What do you mean it's going to be affordable? What do you mean? And over time, we've built more and more support, and having the community and experts repeatedly stand up and say, this is doable, this is important, and this will actually help people's lives and help families, really helps us continue to move the policy forward and make it more politically acceptable. So I just want to say thank you for helping build the space, literally and figuratively.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you so much for coming, but I have one last story to share, and that is from one of the homeowners. So this homeowner was looking around to try to find solutions, and like most of us, when we have a question that we Google, and so he found. So originally, he found somebody who can do this prefab, and that is from Canada. And that he started a process with them and find out that it's very attractive because all the construction will be off-site, and then you will bring the house is pretty much done, and then you bring on-site, and that sounds very exciting. He went along with the process just to find out that particular supplier was not California certified. So it's not gonna work because then you factory will be helping that company to help them California certified. So it doesn't fly. And so instead that he went to another option. And the second option is the number 4 bullet item there, is to build a custom ADU. But then he quickly realized that in order to achieve, to stay within the budget that he has set for himself, which is $100,000, that doesn't seem to be able to, realize his ADU plan. So what he did was that he went with his third and final option, and that is to find out there is a company that they have been building the backyard sheds. And there's a company that they are interested in expanding their business, so they have been helping their clients to do ADUs. And so what it does is that they have a design staff, and they'll help you to start with the planning of the design. And also they have a dedicated staff. They will help you, help along with the permitting process. And the good thing is that this company, because they have been in business for so long, they have been certified. So that answered all the questions. And so at the end that he found a contractor that helped him to build an ADU. The ADU is about 200 square feet. And it stayed within his budget, less than 100K. So he's very pleased. The process is that you have your site prepared, you hire your own. So pretty much, if you're a DIY kind of a person, and that you have the time and the energy and paying all the attention to go through the process while driving the process, that is doable. Have the foundation laid, and this house that is built offsite will be delivered. And they need only 3 days to have it anchored. And anchoring is a huge, huge issue. And it was pre-approved, tested. And after that, you'll hire a separate contractors to finish the house. So you do the sewer connector, and then your plumbing, and your electrical, and all that. After all is done, that he has a small ADU in the backyard and stay within the budget. So this is one of the options that, just throw into the options. So that will conclude our program tonight.
This project has been all the way through the city process and is approved and is going forward?
Yes, actually it has been, it has has been delivered and have been anchored, and he is now taking his time to do this interior design. And he said it's really, really nice. I asked him, what are you gonna do with a 200 square feet ADU? So the thinking is that they are going to offer it to like maybe Stanford students while they are here, and then his own children, they are offered to colleges now, but if they intend to come back, and maybe this will be a starting point for them to come back. But in the meantime, you'll be used as a rental and income generating ADU. So this is, a happy story from one of our owners. And so the final state, so move to, again, just wanted to remind you that we are Palo Alto Forward is a grassroots group, but we are just a bunch of Palo Alto residents, and we all have this shared vision to believe that housing, it is an important subject and close and near and dear to our heart. Also, we have thousands of followers, and we also accept, the memberships, which they pay for events like this that we organize, and we do organize dozens of events throughout the year. So if you, are interested, please make sure that you sign up with us, and then stay with us, and we will, host it and some other events, and that might be something that is of interest to you. And the final slide is a thank you for everybody who come and to share their experiences, and those who stay in the background to help this possible. So thank you so much.